pick up again from chapter 5. We started on Thursday. Last week we started reading the first paragraph of chapter 5, but let's start again from the beginning of chapter 5. So we've said till now that there are two aspects to leaving exile. There's obviously the first, leaving Egypt, that occurred in the historical event of Yetzias Mitzrayim that we commemorate on Pesach. But then there's the obligation to leave Egypt every single day, and that represents the leaving the restrictions and the obstacles and the challenges that are posed by the animal soul, by the body, by the physical world, the things that prevent us from serving God. That's one type of exodus of Egypt that we're called to experience. And another type of exodus of Egypt, as we talk about the future redemption, is the idea that we have to leave behind even the limitations of spirituality, even the limitations of the spiritual realms. And we discussed in chapter 3 and chapter 4 what that means. What does it mean that there are limitations in the spiritual realm and holiness if God is infinite? So we explained that all of creation, even the spiritual worlds, even the spiritual realities, have some type of definition. And therefore they have a limitation. And when Mashiach comes, we're going to be, what will be revealed then is the level of God, of godliness that is beyond description. God's essence will be revealed. That's beyond description, therefore beyond limitation. And so in order to get to that point, which is a being free of all description, definition, and confinements, so we have to experience that as well. That's the spiritual Yetzias Mitzrayim, the leaving behind of that level of limitation, that type of Mitzrayim. So Mitzrayim, the term Mitzrayim is a term that describes limitation, definition, any given level that you're at, even up to the highest level, as we said, even to the source of the Kav, meaning the very first level of creation. Already there, we're experiencing Mitzrayim. We're already experiencing a definition and a concealment or a constriction, and we have to rise above it and leave that. Now in chapter 5, the Rebbe says so before we get to chapter 5, we had made the statement that that in order to prepare for the future redemption, there's that additional aspect. There's a higher level of service. That higher level of service is presumably what we said till now, which is leaving the spiritual exile behind. Now, the Rebbe chapter 5 is going to take it to another level and say that not only is it required in order to bring about the redemption, when we leave, we shed all labels and limitations and concealments and constrictions, so it's necessary to have the spiritual Yetzias Mitzrayim, spiritual exodus, but the service, particularly right at the time, right before we go to the Geula, right before the redemption, our service then, or now, is on a greater level, on a higher level than even the service of the Jewish people in exile throughout history. That's what we're going to do. So we explained already how, in one way, since today we have the capacity to leave the spiritual exiles behind, because even though we may not be on the same level as previous generations, but because we have the luxury of coming after them and having the benefit of having all these thousands of years and all these centuries of mitzvahs, of good deeds, and the bad and the evil is something that is not permanent, doesn't last. It's something that is purged from the record. And so therefore we have the benefit of having all of the accumulated good and mitzvahs that were done. So we have that benefit, so we can now be on a higher level. Now the Rebbe says he's going to take it to another aspect and give us a third aspect, or a different way in which we can experience Yetzias Mitzrayim that is beyond what's been experienced up to this point. Okay, chapter 5. V'hinei. So we're on page Reish Zayin, chapter 5. V'hinei zeh shelo asad laviti hayitzia mikol hamitzrayim v'hagvala, is that which we've said, that when Mashiach comes in the world to come, we will shed all limitations. This is true regarding all aspects. All aspects of the future redemption will be completely incomparable to the way they are now, on a whole different level. This is true with regard to the material world. Just as the prophet says that when Mashiach comes, then there'll be a new heaven, a new earth, there'll be a new world. Not only is it true with regard to the material, but even spirituality, even Torah. Torah, which is connected to reality, since Torah is the blueprint through which God creates the world. Right? He looked in the Torah and created the world. So the Torah as well is going to be renewed. There will be a new Torah, so to speak. There will be a new Torah. And again, obviously, we know that this is not the place to talk about what the meaning of Torah Chadash is. We know, God forbid to say, it says Torah Zu Leitei Muchlefes. We're not going to have a new Torah. There's not going to be a new set of mitzvahs. The Torah remains the same. It's eternal, but it means a newer dimension, an aspect of Torah that will be revealed then. And so too with regard to the revelation of godliness that will be present in the world. The revelation of godliness, right? We know, obviously we live in a time now of concealment where we don't see godliness, but there's a godly energy that sustains everything, that animates everything, and it's concealed. Our job through a performance of mitzvahs and learning Torah is to reveal it, or at least to be able to see through it with X-ray vision, so to speak. But not only now, even the revelation of godliness that existed before in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, when there was apparent, we were able to see miracles. We're going to get to that in a moment again. And even at the beginning of creation, where God creates a perfect world and then throws everything into chaos with the first sin of the tree of knowledge. And so even in relation to that revelation, we're talking about a whole new revelation, a whole new reality, a whole new aspect of godliness that will be manifest in the world when Mashiach comes. All of the revelations today are from the outer level, the external part of Atik. When Mashiach comes, it will be the inner dimension of Atik. We discussed on Thursday. We're not going to revisit again now the whole what this means, the different levels of Atik and the deeper level. But essentially, the relevant point is that Pnimius Atik is sort of a conduit for God's essence. And so when we say that when Mashiach comes, it will be the inner dimension of Atik, what we're talking about is essentially the Gili of Atzmos, of God's essence, that's undefinable and undescribable. Since when Mashiach comes, there's going to be a whole new world order, a whole new reality, a new world, a new Torah, a new revelation of godliness. So therefore, our service at the end of the exile also has to reflect this. Since everything when Mashiach comes will be new, so too our preparations that usher in that reality also needs to be new. And we discussed last week the idea of Chassidus, how Chassidus plays a role in this, the fact that Chassidus was revealed right now towards the end of the Galus time, as we're about to get ready to go into the Geula, and it's a necessary preparation to redemption, because it gives us a taste of what's going to come. So just as we're going to usher in a new reality, our service that leads into that new reality also has to be a new type of a service, something different than what's been before. And that, like that, it's similar, comparable to, obviously it's going to be it's going to be incomparable, but at least it's a proper preparation for what's going to follow. What is this new service that we're talking about that's unique to our time now? So in the time of the temple, when you had a revelation of godliness, 10 miracles, the Mishnah enumerates 10 miracles that occurred to our ancestors in the temple daily. These miracles were visible to the naked eye, to the physical eye, to the extent that any random person who walked into the temple was able to see some of these miracles on a daily basis. So since we're talking about a time, in temple times, when there was this revelation of godliness, when there were miracles that were apparent that anybody can walk in and see, so obviously our service of God then was rooted in reason. You saw miracles, so there was no denying God. It was a very rational thing then to go ahead and serve God. Even though then there was still the commandment to serve God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might, which means to transcend reason. So you have with all your with your heart, with your good inclination, your bad inclination, your soul, meaning your nefesh, even means giving your life. So there's a expectation that we even have to sacrifice ourselves for God. Now we know that self-sacrifice is not a rational thing, and we've explained in other mamarim discussed this idea a little bit more in depth. That self-sacrifice goes beyond reason to give your life for something. Nevertheless, as we've said, Mikol Makam Mikivin Shiro as Gilei Lokos B'Muchash Gama B'Mesiris Nefesh Haisa as Hayimedidav Agbal Tamadas. Since then, there was a revelation of godliness. Godliness was apparent. So therefore, even though there's an expression of beyond reason, the idea of giving your life, which goes beyond reason, nevertheless, it was a reasonable step to take. Just like we talk about faith, that there's blind faith, which is irrational, and then there's a faith, which is the Jewish faith, has to be rational. It's rooted in reason. So even though faith goes beyond reason, it takes you to it's in a place where reason can't access, can't go. You talk about things that you believe for the future, so you have to say you believe it because you don't know it. But the things that you believe, that you predict for the future, are based on rationale, based on reason. So they're reasonable assumptions, reasonable things on which this dream or this faith is based. So similarly, even though in the time of the temple there was an idea and a requirement, an obligation to serve God with all our might, meaning self-sacrifice, nevertheless, even that self-sacrifice is rooted in reason. It was reasonable to give your life for God. It's not a chesarn. It was just wasn't. That's what it was. Everything was rooted in reason. It was a more intellectual, intelligent era of people that had a deep, intelligent understanding of God, and not only intelligent, but also, re'iyah, being able to see God. So the God's reality and supremacy was something that was non-negotiable. It wasn't debatable. It was something that you were able to see. And so therefore, their service was a rational one, rooted in the rationale. And this is true not only in the time of the temple when you had a revelation of godliness, but the Rebbe says, this is, I think, a shtickle chiddush, that even in exile, when the darkness of the exile wasn't so intense, even then, serving God could be rooted in the rationale. And the truth is, we talk about this, I think, when we talking before about faith and belief in God, that the Jewish belief in God is a rational one. It's rooted in reason. So when you think about God, and you think deeply about God, and you study, and you get to know, so that God exists is a rational conclusion that a person has to come to. It's more reasonable to assume that God exists than that He doesn't. Now, we can get into the details, the nature of God, the reason, the purpose. That already, that theology we can debate. But the fact that there's a first cause, even science is based on that idea, that there's a beginning. So, however you want to refer to that beginning, however you want to describe it, however you want to explain it, but it's still a rational thing. And so it's very reasonable to acknowledge that there's a God, that there's a creator. There's also reasonable, if you follow that logic through to its logical conclusion, you can get to the point where there's a God that has a purpose. I've been created for that purpose, and I can fulfill that purpose. So even though we don't see God now, so there's always room for more doubt than there was, say, in the times of the temple. There's no question that there's more doubt. But still, there's a compelling, logical, underlying foundation to that serving God. And that's true even in exile, even when God is concealed, but when that concealment, when that darkness is not so intense. However, now, in the generation at the heels of Mashiach, right at the doorstep, right before we come to Mashiach, where every day the darkness seems to intensify. Note 37 cites from the Gemara in Tzeitcha, the end, mamash, the last page of the Gemara in Tzeitcha, where it says, that every single day, right before Mashiach, the darkness gets bigger, the tsaris, the suffering, the craziness of exile intensifies every single day. So v'yeshem kamen nisyonis, and there are all kinds of challenges. Ubefrat hanisoyin dal yevish b'pnei amaligim, and specifically the challenge of not to be intimidated by the scoffers, not to be intimidated by those that laugh and those that mock. And specifically, especially when these scoffers are low lives, which becomes very difficult for a person to handle. The fact that we can withstand these challenges. This is a self-sacrifice that's beyond limitation. So what the Rebbe is saying here is that this new reality that's going to be ushered in with redemption is preceded by a new type of serving Hashem. We talked about the idea that exile is all about that Galus is all about leaving Mitzrayim, leaving limitation. But specifically now, in this last generation, right before the Geula, right before the redemption, it takes on a whole new component. There's a whole new level to it. There's a whole new process of it. And that is that we serve God beyond any limitation. So as intelligent, rational beings, our service can be rooted in the rationale and is therefore limited to the rationale. So you understand more, your service is deeper, is greater. You understand less.
Menachem Korf has a question.
What's his question?
Haven't there been times when the darkness was greater than today?
Okay, so it's a good question. The question is how do we refer to today? It's a different kind of darkness. Let's get back to that in a moment. This thought is going to lead into that point, based on what the Rebbe cites here in note 39. Hopefully, we'll answer that question. But it's a good question. I'm trying to work my way to it. So, whenever there's a reason, a rationale, so the service is when that's the foundation. So the service of God is always limited to how much you understand, how much you can appreciate, how much you can feel. But what happens when there is no rationale to it, when it's not rational, when there is no understanding? So then when you serve God, it's not limited by those feelings, by that experience. Let's finish the end of this paragraph, and then we're going to come back to Menachem's question and explain this idea a little bit more. Okay. So we said that this idea is a new idea. The fact that now we serve God in a new way, which is not limited to reason, beyond any measure, beyond any limitation. This is why the service in this generation, and specifically within this generation, at the end of the time of exile, is beyond, is higher, is greater than the service that's been till now in history. Rebbe says, in a way that's incomparable. To the point that we can call it a new service, similar to the new reality that will come with Mashiach. Because the aspects of service that was in the prior generations had some type of connection to understanding, which causes a medida v'hagbala, meaning that it's limited to our experience, to our understanding, our emotion. But the service that comes at the end of the time of exile, this is a service of a sacrifice that comes from the essence of the soul. Okay, let's take a look at Ha'ara 40, and then we'll tie this all up together. Okay, note 40, the Rebbe says, Ukiyadua, the Pirush HaKosov is known, the Chassidish Tzeitcha in the Pasuk that says the translation of the words, V'yish Moshe Ana Ma'od, Mikol Adam Asher Al Pnei Adama, right at the end of, I'm sorry, not at the end, in Parshas Ba'aleischa, where it talks about Moshe being challenged and questioned again by his people. So it says that even though they were, Miriam and Aaron were questioning him, and they're talking about Moshe negatively, Moshe nevertheless remained humble. He was a humble person, more humble than anybody on the face of the earth. And so Chassidus explains that what does it mean that Moshe was humble? That Moshe's humility stemmed primarily from the fact that right before he passes away, he sees the future, all the future generations, and he was particularly humbled by the generation that came right before the Geula. That generation is what humbled him the most. So we see that from all of history, Moshe is looking at all of history, and which generation stood out to him that caused the most humility was the last one. Meaning that obviously their type of service of God is something different than everything before. So all of the previous generations, and you're talking about great generations of Jewish scholarship, of Tanoim, of Amiroim, or generations of withstanding persecution and expulsions and exterminations. It was the generation right at the end, right before Mashiach, that's the one that was most humbling to Moshe, which in the reverse reflects the idea that this is a whole new type of service. So what does this mean? That now it's mitzad pnimis haneshama, and therefore it's not limited to understanding. So this idea is discussed in a few places, and the idea basically is like this. We're contrasting rational service of God, intelligent service of God, with irrational or super rational. So serving God involves sort of is both an intellectual pursuit and an emotional pursuit. When we serve Hashem meaningfully, personally, it needs to stimulate our intellect and our emotion. They need to be inspired and enthusiastic and involved and invested. The reality is that today, our minds and our hearts seem to be limited. They don't seem to have the same broad capacity to ava and yira, to love and fear of God, as in past generations. So that's number one. So today our serving Hashem is not done with the same conscious experience, thorough experience. It's not. We seem to live sort of like a scattered kind of an existence, or one that's inconsistent. Where on the one hand we can sit and daven and maybe even be inspired. On the other hand, we're very enthusiastic and passionate about our material things and possessions, and completely consumed by those pursuits. So that reflects on, even when we're invested in serving Hashem, even those moments of inspiration, they're not really truly pure, and they're not really to the broadest capacity. So nevertheless, we're still serving Hashem. Nevertheless, we're still doing mitzvahs. We're still studying Torah. So on the one hand, we see that our service seems to be less than previous generations, but on the other hand, what does it tell us? What motivates us to do it? And specifically, when we talk about our generation, we're talking about Jews that you reach out to that maybe don't learn Torah, that don't do mitzvahs, and you stop a Jew on the street and you put on tefillin with him. What's the motivating factor to put on the tefillin? That idea is totally not limited to his experience, because it's foreign to his conscious self and his conscious experience. And so therefore his service is, in a sense, in the purest form of serving God. It's totally disconnected from any limitation and personal experience, personal appreciation, and personal definition. It's completely removed from that. So why does a Yid agree to put on tefillin? Because that's what his soul wants. And so it's not at all tainted and limited. So the fact that we today are, in a sense, on a lower level, emotionally and intellectually, that our serving Hashem is not with the same passion and enthusiasm as previous generations. And when we talk previous generations, we can even look back to the past generation, and see people that somehow everything they did was infused with a whole different type of aspect of devotion. And in a sense, we don't feel that same devotion. We don't feel the same commitment. And yet we are committed. So why is that? Not because of something rooted in our conscious experience, but it's rooted in the subconscious, rooted in the essence of the soul. And this relates to something the Rebbe says in the Vatet Tzav, the Rebbe's last mimer, sort of that parting mimer to us, this last generation that we're talking about, which is that what moves us, what animates us today, is the essence of the soul. The fact that we're connected to Hashem and we can't be disconnected. That goes beyond any description and definition and understanding limitation. So in that sense, our service today is totally different than prior generations. Now, as far as the question Menachem asked, as far as what the Rebbe says here, that now, since the Golus is getting stronger and darker now more than ever before. So first of all, the quote is not unique to the Maimon. It's not a Chiddush of the Rebbe, it's a Gemara. The Gemara in Tzeitcha we quoted. That as we get towards the end of Mashiach, towards the time of Mashiach, the darkness gets darker. So we have to understand really what does the Gemara mean, that it gets darker. So what that means, it doesn't mean necessarily that our lives are endangered. It doesn't mean that the persecution, that the challenges to Yiddishkeit are greater than, say, in communist Russia or in the time of the Inquisition or certainly the Holocaust. That's not what it means. What it means is, again, we're talking in relation to our serving Hashem. So you want to serve God, but there's a challenge to that. When that challenge comes from we live in a time and a reality which is so superficial and so vain, where we're all consumed by nonsense, where a hedonistic type of lifestyle seems to be the lifestyle that we hold up, and to an extent we're all guilty of being sort of absorbed into that type of lifestyle ourselves. That poses a much greater challenge. That's a much greater darkness to overcome. That's a much greater mental and emotional darkness that even external sort of physical persecution and anti-Semitism doesn't pose that kind of a threat. That type of a threat to where the indifference is one that's not even an intelligent one. The challenge to serving God is not an intelligent one. It's not a compelling idealistic ideological argument. It's just a complete being consumed in the material world, in fleeting vanity. That challenge is greater and a much more difficult challenge to overcome and a much more difficult challenge to deal with. That's as far as those challenges. But then there's even in the intellectual side of it, our narcissism today is really unparalleled in history. I'm sorry? You resemble it or you resent it? You resemble that. Our narcissism today, in a sense, is unparalleled to past generations. Where today, while we're a much more knowledgeable generation, we're not smarter, and yet we think we're smarter. Where today, if you know something, then you have to scream it from the rooftops and say that you're the smartest and the greatest, and you're condescending to anybody and everybody that is not. So that also shows a sort of smallness, even in our intelligence, and an arrogance. It's difficult to deal with. So you want to serve Hashem, and you want to rise above not just your material tendencies, your animalistic drives and impulses, but even your human qualities, even beyond intellect. You want to go beyond human intellect and connect with Hashem. You want to connect with the sublime, with the infinite, with what lies beyond the human condition. And yet you're surrounded, and not just surrounded, but being mocked by people that in a sense are acting lower than animals. So that's challenging. In one of the Mamorim, the Rebbe cites, the Friedrich Rebbe talks about these two aspects, where he says the materialism that people are immersed in poses a great challenge. The idea not to be intimidated is stronger than it was before. That's what the Rebbe is saying here. Why? But both sides. Today, the scoffers, so the truth is, not to be intimidated and disheartened by the scoffers, the people that mock Yiddishkeit, that mock our faith. That's a halach in Shulchan Aruch. It's been around, written, codified in Shulchan Aruch. In the first paragraph in Shulchan Aruch, the first law in Shulchan Aruch, it's been there for 400 years, for more than 400 years. And it's certainly, the Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Shulchan Aruch, didn't invent that idea. It's always been around. So this idea of not being intimidated has always been part of Yiddishkeit. But the Rebbe is saying here that this is unique. In our generation, this Al Yevosh takes on a whole new dimension. It's a different level than what's ever been before. Why is it? Because the Maligim today, the scoffers today, are on a whole different level. The challenge is much harder to overcome today, in that everything is bogged down, everything is brought down to such a low level that it becomes hard to deal with, hard to bear. So in the previous Rebbe's Maimer, he says, he gives two examples, one for the hedonistic scoffers and one for the intelligent academic scoffers. The one with regarding the hedonistic people that are just into material, they're into their food. He used an example there, an expression of fressers and zoifers, people that just want to eat and drink and are obsessed with their food and with their drink and with things that are beneath, should be beneath an intelligent thinking human being, and they're completely consumed and obsessed with it, and this is where their passion is. So he says that's like a crown prince who's intelligent, who's educated, articulate, he's bright, he's evolved, and he does something wrong, and so his father wants to punish him. What's the worst punishment he can give him? To send him to live with illiterate peasants that don't know anything, where there's no common language. And so he wants to live his life. He comes in dressed all fancy in his royal garments, and these people are peasants that haven't showered, that don't know what he's talking about. He sits to eat. That pain is unbearable to him. That's the biggest kind of pain. That's the kind of scoffing. A Yid wants to live a Torah true life, and he's surrounded by that's very painful. And talking about the intellectual scoffers today, even the intellectual scoffers today are different than they used to be, because we're, like we said, we're in such a narcissistic society in reality today that if you know one thing, suddenly you're being condescended to, and people look down at you. And the analogy the Friedrich Rebbe gives for that is, he says, imagine a pauper who's never earned a cent in his life. He had nothing to his name, and one day he wins the lottery. I'm sort of paraphrasing what he says. He wins the lottery, and the next day he's a new millionaire, and now he's calling Warren Buffett to give him financial advice. That's because he has his money. He's got a full bank account. And mitamo, he's becoming a new financial planner and advisor because he stumbled upon not even money that he earned. So it's a similar situation where people that have their understanding, suddenly it takes on a whole new level of arrogance that is very difficult to bear. These challenges that we face today are unmatched, and therefore the Rebbe says we can call it a new experience, a new challenge, and a new form of service. The Al Yevish today is a different type of Al Yevish, it's a new one. And through our service in time of exile in general, especially our service now at the end of the time of exile, when the service today is from the essence of the neshama, the inner part of the neshama of the soul, this causes us to then draw and elicit the essence from above, that level of pnimius atik, the inner dimension of atik, as we said before. This will also bring about the chiddush, something new in Torah. Torah chadash mititeitz, as we said before, that new dimension of Torah, that the giver of the Torah, the energy of divine wisdom that will be present in Torah, will be on a whole new level. And here in the brackets, it says, this too is something that comes as a result of our service at the end of the time of exile. When one's serving Hashem and learning Torah with Mesiras Nefesh, with sacrifice, so then the learning Torah is also Lishma. And as the Rebbe says in note 41, the Inyan Lishma hu L'Shem Torah Atzma. When we say Lishma, the Chassidic interpretation is that it's for the sake of the Torah itself, to draw into it the infinite light. Meaning, when we say that we can learn Torah for its own sake, or you can learn it for an ulterior motive. What does that mean? So learning Torah for an ulterior motive means maybe I want to make a living by teaching, or I want to earn people's respect, so I study Torah so I can be a scholar and be respected. That's learning Torah for an ulterior motive. What's the flip side of that? There's learning Torah Lishma, for its own sake, meaning I'm not learning to get anything, to achieve anything, I'm learning to learn, for the sake of learning.
If it's just tapping into Hashem's das, you're still doing it with an agenda, which is to...
Okay, but that already we call Lishma.
Right.
For its own sake, for the sake of learning Torah. The Chassidic interpretation of learning Torah Lishma is learning Torah for the sake of the Torah, for the benefit that the Torah should gain, for the Torah to benefit. When we learn Torah with Mesiras Nefesh, we're learning it because that's not for any, even for that sake but just with Mesiras Nefesh, meaning without any personal agenda. So what are we doing? We're learning Torah with the essence of our soul, and therefore we're connecting with God's essence, and that draws the Neisna Torah of God into a level of a dimension of godliness that's beyond Torah, into Torah itself. So the Torah becomes a new Torah. This brings about not only the new reality within ourselves, but also in Torah, and also in reality in the world, right? The three elements we spoke about before, about L'Asad Lav, when Mashiach comes, that brings about the Stakal Bereisa Bara Alma, that from the Torah it extends to the world. Sheyu Shamayim Chadash and Varetz Chadasha, it ushers in a new reality, a new heaven, a new earth. The Hiratzain, it may be His will. Shekol Zeh B'Karev Mamish, all this should be speedily. Through our service. Achshav, as we said in the new method that we're talking about, this Al Yevish M'Pnei Amaligim on the new level, on this whole new level. So Neilech B'Karev Mamish, L'Kalpanei Mashiach Tzidkenu, will go speedily to greet our righteous Mashiach, She'az Yikuyim B'Poil Mamish, Kimei Tzeitcha Meretz Mitzrayim, Me'aron Neflois. Then we will have the literal fulfillment of these words, that like the days in plural when we left Egypt, I will show you wonders, Umiyad Nigolin, and we will immediately be redeemed. Amen.